Oh, I think we can expand it onto the European. You mentioned it beforehand. I think we are definitely going to be facing some challenges with a new president coming into office that questions fundamental pillars of Western civilization, which in my opinion is NATO and partnership shoulder to shoulderness with the European Union. And now we have a president who, if you ask me, is somewhat of a Manchurian candidate. Yes, I said it and I'll stand by it. I hope that we'll be able to handicap any negative actions in that direction. But I also think, and I'm going to say this as an American, I feel kind of like you. I'm a European American. My parents are originally from Austria. I grew up with the awareness of being American all my life. But I have a big heart for Europe as well. And I think the European Union is a grand adventure, and I think essential to the future of Europe. And I think that this might be the opportunity to finally cut some of the big brother ties, not completely. I don't think, I hope that Europe doesn't ever turn its back on the United States and vice versa. But I think this might be a reprieve where it might be a call to action where Europe should stand up on its own two legs and become a little bit more independent and become a bigger, more dominant player in the global sphere of politics, and also take ownership of NATO. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, with this, we've gone through our own transition with the EU, pushed by an individual. I mean, you talk about leadership, but there's also the sway, the spell, if you like, that an individual leader in the form of Boris Johnson had on our party, where nobody dared challenge him. It got to that place, and it's taken us. He, during the referendum, was happy to remain part of the single market. So, from a trading perspective, still be part of the club that could trade, politically distanced from the EU, but the rest. And as did Farage, as did David Frost, and other big voices in the referendum debate. We've ended up having no relationship at all. The deal we've struck is the most extreme you could possibly imagine, and it's not good for Britain's economy.
Well, I believe if I read your CV correctly, you were not for the split.
No, but I did recognize, and across Europe, this was also the case. When you see people like Le Pen, the Alternative for Deutschland party in Germany, Austria has got your own movements there too.
Well, they all feel liberated and invigorated by what's going on elsewhere.
Yeah, and there's this nationalism that's now growing a little bit. So the idea that the EU can answer some questions but not all, that needs to be recognized. So I think as a trading club, absolutely important. From a security perspective, it also has a role to play, particularly in the non-state actor space, because NATO does state on state. It doesn't do terrorism. It doesn't do criminality. It doesn't do migration problems and things like that, or or extremism. It does big state stuff, such as Russia and so on. That's what it was designed for.
Yeah.
So the EU can then fit into that. And the fact that Britain slid away, distanced itself, and even if it was just the optics, even if that wasn't the intent here, to the rest of the world, it looked like a global player that everybody respected and revered, close to the United States, had the ear of in the White House, and then was the first place to call from America when we don't know what's going on in Europe. So to throw all that away seemed absolutely madness. And we're now starting to repair that.
Yeah, I saw UK. I'm very fond of the UK. I've always saw you as the Three Musketeers, France, Germany, in the UK, and I find it was. The word on the tip of my tongue is reprehensible, but that's maybe too harsh of a word. I found it a pity that the Brits decided the way they did. But I think once again here, I think from an analytical perspective, if you're committed to leadership, I think you can't blame your constituency for the way they vote. You need to blame yourself and ask yourself, what is our responsibility? And maybe we can turn this into a question. Across the world, we see a shift to a more, I wouldn't call it conservative, but it is conservative, a more right-wing tendency, a more nationalistic tendency. Why do you think that is?
I think because a lot of the problems in Britain were blamed on the EU, that we didn't have the ability to, or they got blamed, for example, the migration issues, things like that, that somehow it was sold, that we would suddenly become independent. We could make all our judgments ourselves. And actually, the way the world is going is that we have these massive trading blocks developing: America, Europe, and Asia, led by China as well. And if you're not in one of those economic camps, then you're outside of them. You can strike all the trade deals you like, and we can talk about the Commonwealth. But if much of the Commonwealth now has been overtaken by China and the One Belt, One Road.
BRICS, yeah.
So we need to then recognize what is our relationship with Europe, and we need to upgrade that as well. But recognizing that there is also, because we're an island and historically we've been somewhat independent, that we would like to retain some of that. And I think the consequence of Brexit was that this political ambitions, led by mostly France, I have to say, of wanting to politically integrate Europe, has actually come to a halt. It's come to a threshold, and that's a good thing. Yeah. So the question now is, what next for Britain? And I think you're going to see another generation coming through, wanting a closer relationship with Europe. But it won't be another referendum for some time. But certainly the younger generation are far more engaging than the older generation that, as I say, has this almost romantic idea, going back in history.
Illusionary fantasy of yesterday.
Britain had its own empire, and then we can do it all. No, what we have, though, and people miss out on this, is massive convening power. We're the 6th or 7th largest economy in the world. We have reach, and we are respected for our understanding of the world, of understanding what's going on around the world. So the United States, don't land in Calais on D-Day, land down in Normandy. Why? Well, we're telling you, they're ready for you in Calais. Okay, we'll take your advice. Fine. And it's Ukraine is a great example of that. Rather than complaining about Trump, which we have no right to, that's the American people, whatever you may or not do. He's in the White House for 4 years. We've got to deal with that. Not only that, there are problems for us to work together. So the first thing we should be doing, instead of whinging about the fact that it is Trump in the White House next, is to say, by the way, Donald Trump, this is what we need to do to secure and support Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia won't end there. He will continue his campaign in other parts of Europe. So spelling out the wider ideological challenge, rather than just saying, oh, let's put this fire out in Ukraine and then that's it. That's our job. That's what Britain's role is it to explain and lead, provide the thought leadership, but also provide the convening power too. We can't do all the heavy lifting, but we can certainly take the first step forward.